Jean-Michel Basquiat. God damn, I love saying that name. That's a beautiful name, Jean-Michel Basquiat. That's hot. Monsieur Basquiat was one of the most famous artists to ever live, and another taken at age 27 courtesy of heroin. Now, I'm not an art expert nor an art critic, so I want to talk about the man Basquiat more than the artist, because I have to tell you, when it comes to Jean-Michel Basquiat, in all honesty,
pissed off, man.
Every video I see about him uses these fancy big words like precocious, talking about his life was a cocktail of freedom and pain, and him having a name that conjures up frenetic scrawls, him being a man who paints with enigmatic flurry. What?
What the hell is even that?
Why do people always do that when they talk about art? Did ChatGPT write this? It probably did. I think I solved the problem. Anyway, it's so annoying. Wasn't Basquiat's whole thing that he was disruptive? That he channeled the streets? That he made the art world less closed off and more accessible? Yeah, that was his thing. But then there's the fact that Jean-Michel Basquiat himself, he was not from the streets.
You merely adopted the dark.
Basquiat grew up with good education and was smart enough to know the street image would help him, and he kind of was one of those phonies who thought it was cool to play runaway and be homeless and do drugs. Except the man, he wasn't just addicted.
I ain't addicted, I'm committed.
He really dedicated himself to that life, to that personality he imagined for himself, and with the help of drugs, lots of drugs, he completely reinvented himself. So let's talk about that. Jean-Michel Basquiat was born on December 22nd, 1960 in Brooklyn. His parents were Mathilde André Basquiat and Gérard Basquiat. And if the names weren't a dead giveaway already, they were not born in the USA. Mathilde was from Puerto Rico and Gérard was from Haiti. Now, since we're talking about America in the 60s, remember that that's the same decade that this happened.
I have a dream.
America was a nightmare for a black woman from Puerto Rico and a black guy from Haiti at this time, but still better than the troubled American colony Puerto Rico, and Haiti was undergoing a bloody revolution at the time, so the parents, they brought a lot of politics from other countries and an awareness of the struggle they had experienced to America into their son's life when Jean-Michel Basquiat was just young. Despite that, Papa Gérard Basquiat made it work in New York. In Haiti, he was born into a lawyer family, and he used that education to work his way up as an accountant in the big racist Apple to build a middle-class home for his wife and their 3 kids. So Jean-Michel Basquiat, he grew up cultured, ambitious, middle class, not the type of money where you get to attend the fanciest art school, but the type of money where you get to attend a fancy art museum. You get me, bruv? So no attending fancy classical music and jazz concerts, but listening to a lot of classical music and jazz at home. Cultured, ambitious, middle class. And because of his parents' background, Jean-Michel also spoke and wrote in English, French, and Spanish by the age of 4. So Basquiat was a sophisticated revolutionary artist in the making. That's the good side of his family home. The bad side was that his mom was majorly mentally ill, and the mental hospitals more than out of them. And the only way his father knew to raise his children alone was to be super strict. So son Jean-Michel drawing comic strips and superheroes on napkins, floors, walls, whatever, that wasn't exactly the life his father had envisioned for him. And the only one who had encouraged young Jean-Michel to be this creative self was his severely mentally ill mom, which further helped his dad prove that this creative way of life, it leads to disaster. I mean, look at her. She's in a mental institution. The creative mind is an ill one. So you see it, the picture of the childhood that forged the man Basquiat, the picture that I'm trying to paint for you here. Yeah? Good. Because now here's the big Kardashian-sized butt lurking around the corner. But This childhood so often gets painted as super traumatic, and all the people talking about Basquiat are like, ooh, Jean-Michel Basquiat had a rough childhood and it was torn between his mother and his father and it left deep scars and nah, man, that's not a rough childhood, that's a complex childhood. Big difference. And I know, drama builds trauma in people in different ways. For one, the death of a family member is the end of the world, and for another, it's the beginning of a new one. But we have to stay objective here, folks. Jean-Michel Basquiat did not have some traumatizing, abusive childhood that left him so deeply scarred that he could never recover, and his only way to access his true self was heroin and art. No. Subjectively, to him, maybe that's true, yes. But let's not choke on his pity meat here. Jean-Michel Basquiat was not the first guy who wanted to be an artist while his dad wanted him to be a doctor or something, and not the first guy whose mom struggled with mental health. But, I mean, he did then become the first heroin-addicted black artist who would go on to sell America's most expensive painting for $110 million, so there's that. Fair enough. There's also one thing from his childhood that definitely affected the future artist deeply. Jean-Michel was hit by a car and was severely injured and hospitalized when he was 7 years young. A bit like a superhero origin tale, which is fitting because Basquiat loved comics, but while he was recovering from the car accident, recovering from a broken arm and several severe internal injuries, he wasn't reading comic books while he was recovering. He wasn't reading about invincible superheroes, nah. His mom figured that this 7-year-old boy should at least know what he almost died of and bought him a book called Grey's Anatomy.
I love you.
No, not that Grey's Anatomy, not the Grey's Anatomy with an E. I don't know why all cheesy romance things think they're clever by replacing the A in Grey with an E. Nah, Basquiat was reading Grey's Anatomy with an A. It was a book on the human shape, anatomy, the insides, the sinews, and the brain, how it works, how it's framed. And ultimately, it was Jean-Michel's segue to becoming the greatest artist of his day, and the human body became the signature of his fame.
Ooh, smoke that.
Because I spit hot fire.
But seriously, if you don't know any of Basquiat's art, it's filled with skulls and flesh and guts to showcase the power and the vulnerability of the human body. Grey's Anatomy truly shaped Basquiat. Eventually, young Jean-Michel recovered from his injuries, and like any true artist, school wasn't for him. Well, actually, it was less school that was the problem and more the authority running it. So he played a prank on his principal, got expelled, and decided to just drop out of school entirely at age 17. So then his dad decided to drop him out of the house, which was cool because Jean-Michel decided to drop by Washington Park and give this whole homeless lifestyle a try. From a middle-class home to a park bench.
Great success.
If that sounds like a stupid, rebellious teenager, well, he was a rebellious teenager, just not stupid. Jean-Michel really was not stupid. But still, I feel like there was probably some middle ground between I'm not going to school, Dad, to I'm going to live on the streets now and do heroin. I don't know. And it personally always, it pisses me off when people with choices and options choose to live the street life that they don't have to. Like, it's kind of arrogant, it's ungrateful. But hey, it also kind of worked out for Basquiat. Well, until he joined Club 27 10 years later, but we'll get to that about 10 minutes later in this video. With the park bench and Washington Park came freedom, and while others reinvent themselves in their 30s by quitting their job and starting a YouTube channel, Jean-Michel Basquiat reinvented himself then and there at age 17. Jean-Michel, a boy from a middle-class home, became the system-rebelling graffiti artist SAMO. Now, New York at that time, and that time is the late 70s by the way, it was raw. Really raw. Specifically, Lower Manhattan was low rent, high crime, high drugs, aka perfect for artists who ran away from home and can't afford rent and want to get high and channel the streets to get inspired and live life the way they consider real life to be. So that's where and when Basquiat started to make his mark. He teamed up with another high school dropout of Puerto Rican descent who went by the name of Al Diaz. And in 1976, they started tagging Lower Manhattan's walls with cryptic, poetic, deep messages like... Actually, not like, I'll let you read the actual messages. Let me show you.
Back when Ratchet was a Ratchet and the Vixen was a Vixen and Jam Master Jay was a lob, I was mixing.
Yeah, and as you just saw, they signed it all as SAMO, which I'll let adult Al Diaz explain what SAMO exactly means.
SAMO was started out as a private joke. It came from the expression same old, like you hear two older black guys, talking and say, hey, what's up, babe? And one guy will say, same old, same old shit, sort of thing.
It was a lot of anti-establishment stuff. And while all of this might be played out a little bit nowadays and all over Instagram captions, when SAMO did it, this was something new. This was original. Every trend plays out eventually, right? But it also has to start somewhere, and this one started right here with SAMO. And I have to stress how cool and original and fresh their way of tagging these anti-establishment messages was at the time. And so, before long, all of Lower Manhattan knew about SAMO, but no one knew who the hell SAMO actually was. All the while, Basquiat and Al Diaz were living their best life in Lower Manhattan. Well, best life is highly subjective, but in this case it was doing a lot of hard drugs, partying it up with Lower Manhattan's artist scene, doing more hard drugs, hanging out and sleeping in with the rich rebel kids looking to piss off their parents, then doing some more hard drugs alongside the down and out addicts who wish they actually had parents that cared enough to be pissed off and needed those drugs, and of course they hung out with other artists who also did hard drugs for inspiration. And Jean-Michel, he was in the middle of it all. Literally, he was the center of it all because he was just so damn cool. And I'm not being sarcastic. Everything about him, his style, the way he carried himself, the way he was some mysterious, somehow highly educated street poet, people were drawn to him. And there's a lot of accounts from the time that testify that how cool he was. And don't just take my word for it. Look.
It ain't hard to tell. I'm the new Jean-Michel. Surrounded by Warhols, my whole team ball.
So here we are, Basquiat, popular as hell in Lower Manhattan's artist scene, creating and living the street artist image he always wanted for himself, injecting H on the regular while couch surfing the homes of his friends or staying at the apartments of his rich girlfriends who wanted to hook up with the black street artist. It was a very inauthentic approach to seeking an authentic life of hardship and inspiration, but it worked for Basquiat. SAMO was challenging societal norms all over Lower Manhattan and getting bigger and bigger. SAMO was going viral before viral was a thing. And then, at the peak of its mystery and heat, Basquiat revealed.
I am Iron Man.
Well, him and Al Diaz were SAMO, but Batman, Robin, you know how it goes. And make no mistake about this, Basquiat really enjoyed the spotlight and the attention, even though, of course, he pretended he didn't care about it.
I could care less what anyone thinks of me.
That's what you want people to think of you.
So with the SAMO reveal having everyone all excited and all on Basquiat's meat, it was the perfect time for then 19-year-old Jean-Michel to cash in on that hype. And it's not like Basquiat had just been tagging and getting high. No. This young man had been painting and creating incredible art all this time. Music, poetry, sculptures, most of all, paintings. He just couldn't afford a canvas or a studio or anything, really. But he was smooth, and so he could afford a bunch of girlfriends, who then could afford their walls and their floors being used by Basquiat. Their walls, their floors, or their sofas, their doors. Basquiat used people's homes to create art pieces. And if he didn't have other people's homes, he used discarded homes. Like, he literally looked for wood on the streets, broken doors, tires, whatever he could find on the streets of New York. He dragged it back to his girlfriend's apartments and used it as a canvas. And he got really, really good at that. So at this point, Basquiat is 19 and he's on his way to mastering this art style, but still not making any money off of his art just yet. But he did have the perfect platform, and this SAMO reveal, and all of Lower Manhattan was ready for this now revealed creative genius for Basquiat. So Jean-Michel, he cashed in on his momentum by selling postcards on the streets for $1.
$1? I've never seen $1. Nobody's got $1. Let us see the dollar.
Yeah, Basquiat was selling these cheap postcards that are worth a fortune now, which had his trademark art on them. And again, at this time, no one did art like Basquiat. You have to understand that this was original. But many things that are original are often just weird until they become famous and popular. And right now, at this point in time, with the postcards, it was leaning more towards the weird, the acquired taste that hadn't been acquired yet. But Basquiat was persistent in selling these postcards and convinced he would make it as an artist one day. And you know how it goes.
You hang around the barbershop long enough, sooner or later you're going to get a haircut.
And in 1979, Basquiat was hanging around the Serendipity restaurant in Lower Manhattan when he saw Andy Warhol eating there. And if you don't know who Andy Warhol is, Andy Warhol was the hottest artist of his time and also someone who had challenged art convention and changed the game in his time. He was one of Basquiat's role models, and so Basquiat rolled up into that restaurant and sold Andy Warhol one of his postcards. This one, to be exact. And from that moment on, nothing happened. It's just cool that he sold a postcard to Andy Warhol in 1980, but nothing happened. But something else did happen though, unrelated to the postcard. Basquiat was featured in his first exhibition, the Times Square show, in June of that year. And there, his art finally got the attention it deserved. A press article was written about Basquiat, and while I don't have the article, I do have the guy who wrote the article and who also had this to say about Basquiat.
I believe I first saw his work in his apartment with Diego Cortez. Diego had met him and said, you know that guy SAMO, he's doing these great little paintings now, drawings. And I said, sure. I was very interested in what he was doing as a graffiti artist. And so we went to visit Jean-Michel in this little apartment he shared with Suzanne Malouk at around 1st Avenue and 1st Street. Tiny little place. And I'll never forget walking in there. Every surface of this apartment was covered. There's little drawings strewn all over the floor, writing all over the walls. The ability that Jean-Michel had to go direct from what was going on deep in the recesses of his brain and just pour it out right onto the piece of paper, right onto the canvas. That directness that was unconstrained by what one should do to make it look good, to make it look neat. It was pure energy pouring out there.
And from then on, things did take off. Once his art was out there at exhibitions, people saw how original it was, how unique it was. And that's exactly what I don't want to talk about here, because there are a million videos about Basquiat's art. But also I can't completely skip over that in a video about an artist. So here goes, I guess, my analysis. Basquiat's art brought the street and rap to the art world. You know how rap uses samples from older music, chops up samples and mixes them together? You know how when you write rap, you sometimes just have a bar.
I got a bar about a bar. It's not a joke, it's just a bar. A nigga walk into a bar.
Bits and pieces, but not an entire song. Rap can be one fluid motion, but it can also be choppy, and so it is often literally chopped up and remixed. That is what Basquiat did with art. He used influences from all over, from Africa to Da Vinci to Picasso. He had comic books and historical textbooks and restaurant menus, everything open and all around him while he was painting. He had the TV on with the news, with cartoons, with movies. He had music blasting, everything from whatever was modern at the time to the classics he heard at home. And all of that, all of it, found its way into Basquiat's genius and often heroin-expanded mind, where he formulated the incredibly unique art he then put onto the canvas. And that's why his art looks so disjointed. It's remixed. And it was so goddamn original at the time. Nobody else did that. It didn't exist. That art did not exist. So that's why once he had that first exhibition in 1980, things started falling into place rather quickly. In February 1981, he had a show in New York that also featured Keith Haring and Andy Warhol, and later that year he got his first representation in Anina Nosai, who got him his own studio and gallery in Soho to put his art onto a large canvas, and soon after that, Basquiat sold those large canvas paintings at his first own show, sold out everything, and became a household name overnight. And then, just 5 months later, he left Anina because she sold paintings of his that he said weren't done yet. But don't forget, ultimately, it was Basquiat's art that had made him a star. However crucial Anina was, at the end of the day, she was just the representation that knew how to market and finance everything. At this point, though, it wasn't hard for Basquiat to find new representation, and that came in the form of Bruno Bischofberger, who got Jean-Michel his first international show in Zurich. And so Basquiat went from a runaway that was tagging the walls of Lower Manhattan as SAMO to an international superstar that brought that same energy and attitude he had tagged with to the world of fine arts. I mean, it was incredible. And you know the old saying, you can take the man out of the spray can, but you can't take the spray can out of the man. Like, that doesn't work. But it does sound exactly like something that might happen on a doped out night in New York in the 70s and 80s. This was a white man's world through and through. And now this black street kid comes in with his raw art style and these political messages and all these portrayals of black people, of forgotten African history. I cannot overstate how different this was at the time. I can't tell you how many doors Basquiat opened and how many important conversations he started, but I urge you that, if you're interested, watch other videos that explain Basquiat's art and the messages within better. It's super interesting, and it ranges from slavery to Machiavelli to ancient history to everything in between. The message he brought to the art world was one that had to be heard. I'm just not sure if people actually heard it or just thought it was cool. And to be honest, I'm also not sure if Basquiat really understood his own message fully.
Where did the words come from?
Real life books, television.
Yeah, and you just skim them and start including...
No, I mean, when I'm working, I hear them, and I just throw them down.
Oh, yeah? Well, I mean, things like Punic Wars. I remember that was in one of your...
Oh, that was from a guidebook on Roman history.
And you had been reading it, and...
Well, it wasn't that long, that actual history part of it. It's like, history of Rome in 5 pages,
But I do know that he grew into a man that was aware of his impact, and while his absolutely self-constructed image as street might have started off as him wanting to be cool, adult, famous Basquiat definitely saw it as more than that.
I think there's a lot of people that are neglected in art. I don't know if it's who made the paintings or what, but I don't know. Black people are never really portrayed realistically, and not even portrayed in modern art enough.
It was ironic because Basquiat so badly wanted to be street, and now it bothered him that people saw him as this token black street guy in the art world. They used his image to fetishize him. So the ambiguity of a middle-class kid masquerading as street stayed with him. It just shifted gears to a masked man now wandering the masquerade balls of the fancy art world.
Michael was not from the ghetto, and he was not a criminal or a tough guy. He didn't even know how to fight, he wasn't from the street. He was just doing graffiti because it was so popular in the art world, and he really had ambitions to make it as an artist.
But the thing is, Basquiat loved the perks that came with that fancy word, and it got him the attention he craved. The problem was just that he wasn't necessarily in control of the narrative anymore. And if you remember, Jean-Michel dropped out of high school because he hated authority. Being in control mattered to Basquiat, which is tricky if you're also a serious heroin addict amongst other drugs, because those things don't exactly help you take back control of anything, much less your own narrative. Basquiat had fully morphed into the controversial, transcendent street artist in the public eye, and that public couldn't get enough of him. He even rubbed shoulders with megastars like David Bowie, and he rubbed more intimate body parts with Madonna. Basquiat was the superstar in the art world. Meanwhile, Basquiat's idol, Andy Warhol, was on the decline, and the most up-to-date contribution that Andy Warhol made to modern art was buying a postcard from Basquiat for $1 a couple of years ago. Warhol was considered washed and unable to keep up with the new generation. He needed a lifeline, and Basquiat was happy to do lines with him. The two connected. Warhol understood fame better than anyone else in the art world, and he became a mentor and genuine friend to Basquiat, who was skyrocketing in his own fame. The two got very close, started creating art together, and the whole Basquiat-Warhol relationship, really, it could fill its own video. For now, just know that while their friendship was growing, their art, the art that they did together, free fall. Critics hated the Basquiat-Warhol collaboration when it got its own exhibition in New York in 1985. All critics saw was washed up Andy Warhol using Basquiat as some kind of gimmick, as a mascot. And by now you know how Basquiat feels about being used, and you know how much he cared for his reputation, so this wasn't working for him. The man whose art is filled with messages about oppression and independence and race, this black man was not okay with being considered a mascot to white Andy Warhol, and so he cut ties. Basquiat left one of his genuine friends behind, and Warhol was not the only friend that Basquiat turned his back on. As his fame increased, so did Basquiat's artistic output, and as his artistic output increased, so did his use of heroin. His addiction was out of control, and he wasn't able to maintain friendships anymore. And when a girlfriend of his tried to intervene and checked Basquiat into rehab in 1986, Jean-Michel, he was back out and back on heroin just 3 weeks later. Heroin was his escape and his prison. The drugs allowed his artistic fire to burn so bright that Basquiat created over 1,000 paintings and 2,000 drawings in just 10 years. But it also burned so bright that it killed him. On August 1st, 1988, Jean-Michel Basquiat died of a heroin overdose. Now, if it feels like I rushed the later bits of this video, I rushed the ending of his life there a little bit, it's because I did. The later parts of Basquiat's life were more defined by his art, while the actual person, Jean-Michel, became less and less. The artist was now just an object fueled by drugs, working in overdrive and in isolation. So there isn't really much information on who the lonely person Jean-Michel, the artist Basquiat, was in the years leading up to his death. In fact, the person he was is probably only found in his art, which was the only way he expressed himself anymore in the end. And again, for those messages found in his art, I urge you to do a deep dive elsewhere for analysis. As for my 2 cents, writing this video, I did notice how I was really annoyed at how Basquiat just ran away from home, turned his back on all his blessings, even if they weren't perfect. But to turn his back on a solid middle-class life to pursue a life in the streets. Streets aren't a joke. People want to escape the streets. It's a situation you want to get out of, not into. So I was surprised at how much that annoyed me, actually. And then there's the fact that the guy was writing about so many profound political and cultural issues he maybe never even researched, never care to actually know anything about or to actually educate people on, other than the headline-only approach, the shock value approach that was certainly prevalent in a lot of his messages or many of the causes he echoed in his art. I don't like when people think controversy is creative, so that also annoyed me a little bit. But then I was thinking,
It doesn't matter what you think!
do you even have to actually live the life you want to represent? Do you have to be a model citizen of the better world you want to create? I don't think so. So at the end of the day, just putting a conversation on the table has great value. And Basquiat was the table and the conversation. His work resonated. It still does, sparking conversations that might not have happened otherwise. There's detailed critique and academia, and then there's what Basquiat went for, gut punches. And while the former might be important, the latter still leaves you breathless. God damn it. Now I sound like one of those wordy, wannabe poetic, annoying YouTubers loving his own words in an art video. That's the very thing I complained about in the beginning. I have become. Do a video long enough to see yourself become the villain. Anyway, Basquiat is pretty damn polarizing. So I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Is there any anger in you? Any anger in your
Of course there is. Yeah, of course there is.
Talk about that. Tell me what the anger is. What are you angry about?
I don't remember. You know,